Hey, how you doing? So today we're going to be painting the model we prepped in the previous video. You know, the knob on the Smasha Squig from the Beast Snagga box set from Games Workshop. Beautiful model. It took a fair amount of prep work, so now we're going to see if it is worth all that sanding and filling and priming and to get it ready to paint. So in this project we're going to be doing some chipping, we're going to be doing some stippling, we're going to be using some streaking grime to not make a streaking grime effect. And also I'm going to try something I haven't done before. Now, how am I going to do this? Well, let's go play with some paint. Now, most of the squigs you see in the artwork from Games Workshop and whatever's going around, most of the squigs are just red. Now that works really well because you've got the red of the squig and it contrasts beautifully against the green of the orc. But sometimes you want to do something a little bit different, especially for a character. So I'm going to try and paint mine like a real life dragon. Okay, not a real life dragon, but I wanted to use some real life reference photos to help me plan this one out. So once I looked online, I found these photos of red iguanas. Now looking at these, I loved the black and red markings around the face, and I loved especially on this one, with the different hues of red, very vibrant red through to quite orangey and yellow in places. Also on this one here, I really like the stripy markings. But if you look at it, it's not a solid straight line and it's not very well defined. But it's not blended either. So I have to try and figure out how I'm going to try and achieve that one. So the first thing I'm going to do is put a layer of Vallejo Model Air Hull Red down. Because this is quite a translucent paint, you can see the highlights and the shadows coming through from the priming. Now I'm doing quite a rough coat on this one, but it still did the job. Now I know the iguana's eyes were black, but I wanted to add a little bit more colour in there. Now I wanted a white kind of colour for this headpiece, but I try and avoid using white as often as I can, because then there's nowhere for you to go when it comes to highlights, for example. So therefore I'm going to use a beige from Army Painter to base coat this bit in. Most of the saddle is going to be covered by the orc on top, but it's still good practice as well. So first of all, we're going to put a dark layer of brown down, and then I'm going to work on some different colours coming through that in a bit. Now I still want the base colour of the squig to be red, but I don't want it to be all red. So now I'm going to use the fire red to go over. Now, but once again, this is quite a translucent paint, so it'll also show through some of the differences in thicknesses of the hull red, because there's some variation kind of going on there, and also the shadows and the highlights that we put in during the priming stage. Right, now it's time for the markings. Now I haven't tried this one before, so I have no idea how this is going to work, but I'm going to try using a Filbert brush. Now, because the Filbert brush has more of a rounded end, it won't give you a harsh brush shape like a square head would. So I'm going to try and stipple it on and see how it goes. So I'll do it fairly light to start off with, just to see where I want the markings to go. And then once I'm happy with it, just go over it again and again and again to build up the layers and make it a darker marking, but also to give it that kind of graduated look we noticed on the reference photos back at the beginning. Once I'm done that, I'm going to go back over it again with the whole red again to make it brighter, because the more layers of the whole red, the brighter the red gets. So I'm going to kind of go over this again as a kind of a mid-tone. Also, do you remember the orangey highlights we noticed in the reference photos? So I'm going to add some wood orange into the fire red to then make it more of an orangey tone, then create some of the highlights. I'm just going to work on some of the volumetrics here, so just going to look at what's going to catch the light and also what areas I want to kind of make pop and bring out slightly more. Let's add some sort of wear into this leather saddle. So I'm going to add some chocolate brown, a lighter brown, and it's going to stipple it on where you get the wear and tear on that leather. Slowly also add a bit more beige into that mix to add a bit more highlights into that weathering. Okay, so for this headpiece, if you think about it, he's ramming things with this, so therefore it'd be kind of smashed up. But if I just did it completely scratched up, you're going to lose all that detail of the glyph in there. So using that dark brown, I'm going to add little scratches and dings around the edges. The reason I'm doing this rather than putting lots of silver scratches is that because they're more recessed, the curved edges at the back, they're not going to be the first point of contact when it hits. So therefore it's going to take dings and scratches here, and then it's going to get rusty. So what my plan is to put all the rusty bits around the edges and then build up to more live scratches and stuff in the middle. Now what I noticed was once I had done the dry brushing and some of the silver scratches on the motif in the middle, it kind of lost its definition. So what I then tried was using a black with a fine brush around the edges, the sides, the vertical sides of the glyph to help add that definition back in again. So I quite like painting orc skin like this. So I'm going to use a Humbrol black matte green as a base, and then use a very bright green or mouldy clothes from Army Painter. So I'm going to use that very dark green and that very bright green, and just wet blend it on the model as I go to put in the highlights where I want them to be. And yeah, it's probably not the fastest way to do orc skin, but if you get it right, it can look pretty good. So on the hide that he's got slung across his back, I didn't want it to be just red again, like the squig he's riding. I wanted to try and make it more of an orangey yellow, so it's a bit different, add a bit of colour variation in there, but we'll see how it goes. was going back in this time with a darker brown onto his boots to add some of that wear and tear and some of the shadows in there. So I wanted the bindings around here to look pretty grotty, so I'm going to cheat slightly and just use the streaking grime almost as a wash to give that definition, but also to add that kind of used, dirty look. Right, so now onto the shoulder pauldron. Now I don't know if you've seen it, but I've been wanting to use the helmet markings from the Bad Batch series for ages, and this is the ideal time to try it out. So first of all, I'm going to use like a grey to kind of mark out where I want the markings to be. Also, if you look at the illustrations of the Bad Batch helmets, they're quite illustrative. They've got you can almost see the brush marks going through them, and that's what I want to try and recreate. So once I've now gone over it with the grey, I then kind of go over it with the beige, but then try and do all the brush strokes in one line to try and get that streaky effect you get from the Bad Batch artwork. Also, if you look at the Bad Batch helmet, it's got the little red markings on it as well. I quite like that colour variation in there. So I'm going to put a glyph on here with that whole red again. Now, I had originally painted the saw blades in this in that metallic black. It didn't look right, I didn't like it. So I'm going to use a dark steel powder just to rub it on with a cotton bud. Yeah, I quite like that. Then I'm just going to add some variation and some oily bits using engine oil from AK Interactive. Okay, onto the base. So first of all, just put a base coat of sand down, then just using a dark brown wash to pick out the detail in the base. And also I'm going to go darker actually underneath, add a bit of shadow under the Squig's body. I'm going to use a terracotta to try and pick out some sandstone type stones on the ground. But then add a bit of grey onto it as well to add a bit of variation and make it a bit more stony. And the last step is add a little bit more colour variation as well as highlights in there with the Tamiya Weathering Master Set. Also add a little bit of highlight around the footprints in the base as well. Right, now it's just a case of putting the two halves together. And just super glue the orc onto the Squig and we are done. So love to hear your comments below. If you learned anything from this, please hit the like button. It will help us to spread to more people. And if you want to see more content like this, please consider bashing the subscribe button. So I hope you liked it, because I really enjoyed this build, and I'll see you next time as we continue to explore the world of miniature modelling.